Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being with us. I'm Lina Abu Habib from the Asfari Institute, and I'm happy to welcome you amongst us. This is, as you know, an event to disseminate the research on the role of civil society in emergency response. And very happy to have amongst us colleagues who have been part of this research. This is coming at a very critical moment because finally, in hindsight, we're seeing the role that civil society organizations and different actors have played during the last emergency response, during the last Israeli war on Lebanon. And the data that was gathered, the conversations that we had, all the observations that we had with hindsight, and I think that's the importance of this research, that we were able to look calmly and serenely is maybe an overstatement, but we were able to look after a year of what happened to realize the extent to which grassroots organizations, community groups, local charities, but also ad hoc volunteer network, the ways in which they mobilized rapidly to support displaced people and also to identify vulnerabilities that are not usually under the radar. And how they were able to activate systems and activate mechanisms before formal mechanisms were even activated. I would be really amiss not to say how grateful we all are for every single person who contributed to this research. And I mention here civil society actors, community groups, humanitarian partners, donors, and also, of course, public institutions. It's not an easy task to share your time and your reflections and your recollection 1 year after the fact, but we specifically wanted to see 1 year after the fact what was our learning. And of course, thank you ever so much to our colleagues and partners and supporters, to the EU, the Embassy of Norway in Lebanon for all its continued engagement and support. And particularly grateful for CAMEALEON and to the Norwegian Refugee Council and our every single colleague from CAMEALEON and the Norwegian Refugee Council for their close collaboration, their partnership, and their active engagement to the process. I think part of being all of us in this exercise was a commitment to strengthen locally grounded and what we're calling principled emergency response, which is really instrumental in making the convening and the discussion of this research today possible. And I want to end by saying that for us, as the Asfari Institute, we're committed to generating research that, on the one hand, documents and archives these realities, and one of the main drivers for us was thinking that this exercise was not done during the Lebanon Civil War, where we had 15 years of ongoing conflict, ongoing civil society engagement, but very little tracking and archiving of what was happening back then. And also doing this right now to inform policy and practice and to tease out all the learning from this research. I think this dialogue today will help us identify practical and ethical pathways to embed civil society capacities into crisis preparedness, to embed it into anticipatory action, because we know very well that this is not the end of the crisis, that the crisis will be recurrent, and that the vulnerabilities will continue to be overlooked, and also embed this in shock responsive framework while at the same time upholding humanitarian principles. So thank you for being here, and I want to give the floor to the Deputy Head of Mission of Norway, Reidun Otterøy, for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Lina, for this introduction and overview. Dear colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure to be here today together with partners from the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Lebanese Red Cross, and many others. I want to express my appreciation to the Asfari Institute for this kind invitation. A warm greetings also from Ambassador Hilde Haraldstad. She's traveling and could unfortunately not be with us today. The ambassador and I both arrived in Lebanon in the fall of 2024 during a very difficult moment for Lebanon, and we witnessed firsthand the essential role played by civil society. Over the years, Lebanon has of course experienced multiple emergencies in which civil society were the first responders. These diverse initiatives are really a testament to Lebanon's strong tradition of voluntarism and deep culture of solidarity. The Lebanese civil society contributes not only during crisis, but also in development, bridging humanitarian efforts and long-term recovery efforts, and shaping also policy and advocacy. Norway is proud to be a long-standing partner of Lebanon, supporting humanitarian programs primarily through the UN, the Red Cross, and Norwegian humanitarian organizations. We also support long-term capacity building and development projects with civil society and together with civil society and the public sector. During the escalation in 2024, Norway increased its humanitarian assistance to respond to displacement and allowed flexibility for partners to adapt their programs. It is important, like Lina said, to document these local efforts and dynamics, efforts that are not always systematically recognized, but often have the most immediate impact on vulnerable people at risk. And with this local experience in mind, I would like to transition to the global level and make three main points regarding Norway's approach to localization, donor responsibilities, and the direction of our work going forward. First, strengthening locally led humanitarian response has been a core element of Norway's humanitarian strategy for many years. It is now central also to the global humanitarian reset. For those who may not be familiar, the humanitarian reset is a major reform initiative launched in March 2025 by the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher. Its goal is to overhaul the global humanitarian system to make it faster, more efficient, and more locally led in response to severe funding gaps, record high level of needs, and increased attacks on humanitarian principles. This localization approach is a recognition of the invaluable contextual knowledge that local actors bring, their unique access to affected communities, and their legitimacy they can provide to the response. Strengthening local and national actors is also an investment in sustainable preparedness and longer-term institutional development. At the same time, we must recognize that contexts differ widely. Different parts of the humanitarian ecosystem have distinct roles, and distinct and also important roles. UN organizations have essential normative responsibilities and can scale up rapidly. International NGOs provide expertise and operational capacity. Partnership with local actors, however, must become more equitable. A key principle is that the humanitarian principles remain essential operational tools. They cannot be replaced solely by the word solidarity, as some have suggested. Local actors come in many forms. Not all are positioned to provide impartial assistance, and not all should be neutral. Countries also need organizations and networks that focus on human rights, social justice, and peace negotiations. A nuanced approach to localization is therefore imperative, ensuring that groups that can be vulnerable, such as including women, LGBTQ, and other individuals, are fully included. This brings me to my second point on donor responsibility. Norway emphasized two main principles: flexibility and coordination. The humanitarian reset calls for donors to provide more unearmarked, multi-year and predictable funding. At the same time, flexibility must coexist with core principles, especially those related to women's rights and gender. This is more important than ever, given the pressures on the humanitarian ecosystem with declining funding and increasing needs. Despite these pressures, Norway has maintained its commitment to spending 1% of GDP, meaning the gross domestic product, on official development assistance, ODA. In Lebanon, we remain among the top 10 donors, and globally we are committed to moving towards the target of 25% of all humanitarian funding to go as directly as possible to local actors in line with the International Grand Bargain Declaration, which was agreed between the major donors and the major humanitarian organizations. Equally important is ensuring greater synergies across the humanitarian development and peace nexus in order to break the silos and ensure continuity and complementarity in our work. This includes engaging local actors as mediators, peace builders, community stabilizers, with strong emphasis on women inclusion in line with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Lastly, and in line with all the above, I would like to share a few reflections from the visit of Norway's Minister for Development, Åsmund Aukrust, who visited Lebanon last spring. During the visit, he met with government officials, Norwegian NGOs, the UN, and national partners, and saw firsthand the impact of their work. He visited sustainable fishery initiatives and humanitarian mine action operations in South Lebanon. The latter provided a powerful example of effective joint action, bringing together Norwegian People's Aid, the Lebanon Mine Action Center, and local organizations to save lives and lay the foundation for recovery activities. Recently, our minister launched Norway's Project Turning Point, an aid policy review which will involve broad consultation with Norwegians and international partners. This stems from a recognition that the world has fundamentally changed and that our development policy must adapt to a new reality. The goal is not to do less, but to do better. Reflections from Lebanon and other country contexts will contribute to shaping the way forward in our thinking. On this note, let me conclude by thanking the Lebanese civil society for its courage, leadership, and innovation. Norway remains committed to be a global partner ready to adapt, learn, and support more effective, locally led humanitarian and development systems. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of today's event, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Redun. That was great, and I hope we can keep your comments also for the record. May I introduce Maureen Philippon, the country director of the Norwegian Refugee Council, for her opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the kickoff and the good introductory remark that I think sets the scene in the forward-looking way that we'd like to have today. Distinguished representative of the Ministry of Social Development of the European Union of Norway, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, partners, thank you so much for being here with us today. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the engagement and continued openness to dialogue of the Ministry of Social Development with CAMEALEON on the different products and research that we've produced and that we are working on, and in particular on this one, the space for exchange that we managed to create with the newly titled MOSD and no longer MOSA. Has been greatly appreciated and very useful. It's both why and how we make CAMEALEON policy relevant. I'm very glad to have this second event in a relatively short span of time after one that we had recently with MOSD colleague on the inclusion of people with disabilities in social safety net. This is key to the impact of CAMEALEON, and so thank you so much. The presentation today will go through the finding about the role of civil society. I appreciate that you mentioned the courage of the different actors, which has been key in the escalation with Israel, and document the critical contribution to the response and meeting the needs of the most vulnerable people at dire times. While focusing on the 2024 escalation, it will also go back to the Lebanese civil war, the war in 2006, COVID, the blast explosion, which are most, not all, of the emergency or critical stress points that the Lebanese society have been through in the last decades. From NRC perspective, our engagement in the 2024 response was a clear testament to the importance of working closely with local organizations in the Bekaa, in the south, for the people displaced in Beirut, in the north, so across the countries, really people both who haven't been able to leave, but people also to all of a sudden had to leave their homes almost overnight at the end of September 24. I must say it's also key as now we look. I think we are all looking at how to maintain a high level of preparedness. I think the news are a daily reminder of how fragile the situation is, and therefore how we can make sure. The Deputy Ambassador was talking about the sustainable preparedness. I think this is key as well, and this is absolutely the moment we are in today in Lebanon. Local civil society organizations, grassroots initiatives that may structure themselves as they go in a context of crisis, not only deliver immediate help, assistance, but also develop an organic coordination networks. And they leverage their own personal, communal, informal platforms to overcome a series of barriers, be it administrative, but also security, geographic. And so they operate both as first responders, but also as system builders. At the same time, and going back to the point of preparedness, but also some of the findings that we will go through in more detail, it's also important to raise the question about early mobilization and how we can be more systematic in including local partners in established system, policy mechanisms, so that the speed of their response is also matched by a systemic almost clarity and coherence in anticipation of where they're going to have to work under stress. For all these reasons, I'm sure today will be a very interesting discussion. As I said, we want this to be forward-looking and look at how the different layers of response, local initiative, humanitarian systems, national framework, United Nations, can continue to evolve, maximizing the complementarity and what can be done collectively to strengthen the operating space and capacity of local organization. Again, I'd like to extend our appreciation to Asfari Institute, of course, whose work, expertise, collaboration was central to the delivery of this study, to the EU and Norway for their support to CAMEALEON, their investment in independent, policy-relevant research, allow this contribution, make possible this contribution to contribute constructively to ongoing national focused policy discussion. Thank you very much for giving us the chance to present and for this day of discussion.
Thank you, Maureen. We had factored in 15 minutes for a break, but we started a bit late. So maybe we can have half of it, 7 minutes. So please, if you want to grab your coffee and a nibble to eat, and then we come back to dive into the study and then a discussion, a moderated discussion around it. So 5, 6, 7 minutes tops. Thank you. I want to introduce someone, a colleague who has been instrumental in leading this research. Sarah Boueri, this is not her first research, and she's been really instrumental in figuring out the methodology, in connecting the different dots, in working with the researchers in the field, in crafting the final product. So, Sarah, the floor is yours for the presentation of the research.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all for being here with us today. Before I start with the presentation of the research, I want to extend a few thank yous for the Asfari research team, for our contributors, Jad Malas and Tala Nasif, who couldn't be with us today, for doing a great job on the primary data collection, and most importantly, the contribution of our friends and colleagues from NRC. This was definitely a group work, which we are all very proud of, and it wouldn't have been possible without all the bits and pieces that were contributed by everybody. So thank you again. On that note, I would like to share with you the primary findings of the research that we have led on the role of civil society in the emergency response in 2024 with the Israeli war on Lebanon. This study examines the role of civil society organizations, situating their interventions amid a context where Lebanon is still going through an ongoing economic crisis that has not been resolved for decades, as a result of decades of mismanagement, political paralysis, and weak state capacity. Now, it looks at civil society organizations as not necessarily a homogeneous ecosystem, and explores their interventions in terms of service delivery, providing support, aid to all those who were affected, particularly between the September-December 2024 crisis. It explores coordination mechanisms, funding flows, decision-making, and the way CSOs navigated insecurity and donor pressures. But it also assesses, because we do not want to completely ignore the role of the state in this response. So this is a research that tries to understand whether civil society has supported state intervention, substituted it, or completely challenged it. Nevertheless, this research moves beyond the traditional literature on the role of formal organizations and how they have regularly stepped in crises throughout history in Lebanon. So it looks at organizations that do not necessarily have their mandate in service delivery and being part of emergency responses. We've seen a lot of collectives, groups, CSOs that at the heart of their mandate is advocacy and activism and not necessarily emergency response, but still their role was very much significant during the war. And finally, it asks to what extent local civil society have contributed to the emergency response, what can be done better. And I want to reiterate Her Excellency's words on how we want to, moving forward, do things better rather than do more. I want to take us across a brief historical overview because CSO's intervention in crises in Lebanon is not something new. The only difference is there were slight changes on who were the specific actors and the extent to which CSOs were engaging. So if you start with the civil war in 1975 and 1990, it was mainly militias and confessional charities who were aiding the wounded, providing support, shelters, etc., for all those who were affected by the civil war, which has also reinforced and reinstated senses of sectarianism back in the day. But what's good about, well, nothing good about the Civil War, but post the Civil War period, we started seeing secular organizations emerging. One example is CAMEAL, who's one of the largest organizations providing aid and support in times of crises. We moved to the 2006 war. That is where we started to see the role of local NGOs and international NGOs stepping in. There was a lot of diaspora networks who were also supporting in the reconstruction of areas that were affected in the July war. But again, there was also a lot of politically affiliated organizations who had a very important role in the response. We moved to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019, and I think this is the first time we see a strong presence of civil society as responders to the pandemic. So we've seen CSOs, volunteer networks, leading food distributions, hygiene campaigns, crowdfunding efforts, and that is exactly where civil society became a primary responder to both health and socioeconomic fallout, because again, this was happening in parallel with the economic crisis. Finally, the Beirut port blast on August 4, 2020, and I think this is where civil society, rather than the state, formed the operational backbone of early relief. And it was the first time we actually see strong coalitions of CSOs. One example is the Yalla Care coalition that was a group of civil society organizations that were doing, for the first time, vulnerability assessment to reach out to vulnerable groups, including migrant domestic workers, refugees, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI+ communities, and so on. The 2024 escalation or Israeli war on Lebanon. I'm not going to go into the details of the war. I think this is something we're all trying to collectively forget. I do want to focus on the role of CSOs in the response and how they rapidly pivoted to emergency operations, verifying needs, delivering support, cash and in-kind aid, and sustaining mobile health and GBV services. But despite their central role, response effectiveness was constrained by data asymmetries, restricted access to pooled funding, and politicized information. But again, this crisis reaffirmed CSOs as a de facto primary and first responder to crises whenever crises hit in Lebanon. So 4 elements appear in the literature. The first is, in the absence and erosion of state capacity, support was automatically externalized to local civil society organizations. Weak data and coordination mechanisms. We've seen fragmented interventions, parallel tracks of interventions, inconsistent displacement data, and uneven access to formal coordination mechanisms. I want to acknowledge the role of the Ministry of Social Affairs and all the reforms that they have launched, such as Aman and NDA, but there are still inadequacies, there's still limited coverage, nationality-based exclusions, etc. And finally, CSO trust. It goes without saying that popular trust in civil society organization has grown across history, especially in light of state absence and incapacity. So this has created some sort of credibility, legitimacy, and community proximity between CSOs and local populations. For the methodology, in addition to secondary data analysis, a series of consultations were done. We were able to reach out to 60 participants, which is a really good and impressive number, taking the time, but also the subject that is being studied. So we were able to cover all 5 regions in Lebanon, and those who participated in the data collection included civil society organizations, humanitarian actors, community leaders, local authorities such as municipalities, and public institutions. Moving on to the findings and the discussion. We were able to pull out 5 primary themes. The first is understanding and looking at civil society as first responders and system builders. Again, and at the onset of the escalation, local civil society organizations were the first and the most rapidly responding entities to the crisis. Some drew on prior experience because they have done that, unfortunately, before in 2006 with COVID and the Beirut port blast, but some were just improvising as an instinct, and the first thing to do is to support a fellow community. They delivered food, shelter, health and hygiene support at scale. So it was kind of more of an improvised intervention at first. When it comes to targeting vulnerability and practical dilemmas, early assistance prioritized scale and speed. Again, that was the first thing that communities thought of is that we want to reach out to the largest number of people in the shortest span of time. With time, they were starting to conduct vulnerability assessments to make sure to reach out to everybody, but that was with, or at least with time between that September and November 2024 timeline. Coordination, unfortunately, there were two parallel coordination tracks. The formal one that is led by the government and UN agencies, but at the same time and in parallel, there was the community-based CSO-led coordination track. Financing, flexibility, and speed of response. At the onset of the crisis, specifically local organizations were primarily relying on personal funds, their small reserves, diaspora funding that was being channeled from abroad, because not all donors were very flexible at the beginning, and they had to actually get a lot of approvals. Some donors did not even accept using certain budget lines for the response. So this has also created some sort of constraint. And finally, respondents identifying major preparedness gaps, which we all know of, unclear national protocols, weak logistics, fragmented data systems, and limited integration of grassroots organizations in these national frameworks. So in the discussion, before that, yes, we have 4 important points to take with us after looking at the findings. The first is the intersection between civil society organizations, grassroots initiatives, and formal systems. We've seen the parallel systems, that of civil society organizations and municipalities as first responders in the absence of clearly mandated national lead, which resulted in redundancy of roles, unclear roles, fragmented communication, and parallel action. The second is the enabling and constraining factors for civil society organizations. Having prior experience in responding to crises and having that strong trust with local networks has helped CSOs a lot, but at the same time, this was very much constrained by donor requirements, donor flexibility with how to use the funds that is available. But also there was volunteer fatigue, and the fatigue of having to respond as CSOs every single time to crises I would say the quasi-absence of state institutions in responding to crises. Comparative regional and global perspectives. Having CSOs step in as primary responders is not only unique to Lebanon. This is a pattern we see on a regional and global scale. We've seen it in 2023 in the earthquake that hit in Antakya and Syria, and again, CSOs were actually the first entities to step in and support communities who were affected. So it tells us that there is a pattern that we're unfortunately not able to break. Implications for localization and anticipatory action. The recent response highlights ongoing gaps and between localization commitments, operational realities, and specifically when it comes to having access to equitable funding opportunities and inclusion in decision making. So this leads us to the last part, and a very important part of the study, and that is the list of recommendations that are necessary to start considering moving forward. It is a list of 9. I do want to talk about 3 just for the interest of time. The first is adopting a national disaster risk management framework that is comprehensive and includes all relevant stakeholders. The second is the importance of adopting and conducting vulnerability assessments. Crises happen, but vulnerabilities do not stop when there's a ceasefire or when the crisis ends. In fact, we tend to see these vulnerabilities with time after the crisis ends, and it's very important that whenever there is a framework for responding to these to crises, whatever is the nature of that crisis, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of those who are most invisible and absent from formal discussions. And finally, to involve and to support the involvement of CSOs in national strategies. At the end of the day, they are the ones who have the most know-how, the closest proximity to local communities, and are the ones who are actually doing the heavy labor. It's only fair to have them involved in formal discussions and frameworks. I'd like to leave us with concluding remarks on the need to rethink Lebanon's national emergency preparedness and response approach, given that, unfortunately, there's a crisis every few years. Although civil society plays a very important role in responding to the emergency, it alone, having to handle all of the burden of these emergency responses is, on one hand, unfair, but also unsustainable without the support of strong state institutions. Hence, again, and I think we might all disagree on the extent to which there is the role of the state, but one thing we can all agree on is that the Band-Aid approach in Lebanon no longer works. Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we will not have time for a Q&A for the research because we have to move to the panel, but there is reception afterwards. I'll be there. I'm more than happy to discuss the findings with you all. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, so we will be showing a few minutes, a short video which encapsulates in a very nice artistic way, the key findings of this research, and it will be available for circulation. This will be the first official launch of the document, of the short document.
Lebanon's recent history is defined by overlapping crises. Decades of civil war, the 2006 war, economic collapse, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Beirut port blast. In each emergency, one group stepped forward first. Civil society organizations. During the 2024 Israeli war, thousands of families were displaced within days. Lebanon's National Emergency Response Framework, constrained by limited resources, fragmented structures, and centralized decision-making, struggled to respond quickly, leaving gaps in protection services. In contrast, civil society organizations mobilized rapidly, delivering assistance, reaching affected communities, and adapting to urgent needs. They provided life-saving support while sustaining improvised coordination mechanisms that bridged gaps in formal systems. Key lessons emerge. CSOs respond effectively because of their adaptability, deep local knowledge, and community trust. Informal coordination networks that compensate for gaps in formal structures, especially in early phases. Context-sensitive targeting informed by local insights rather than rigid vulnerability categories. Government CSO interaction is key to moving Lebanon beyond reactive crisis management toward a stronger anticipatory system. The Ministry of Social Affairs' strategic engagement with INGOs shows the potential for state-led, integrated crisis management, improving displacement tracking, needs assessment, and support for internally displaced people. 5 evidence-based priorities can strengthen future responses. 1. Ensure inclusive coordination involving grassroots and marginalized actors. 2. Adopt dynamic vulnerability analysis reflecting evolving risks. 3. Institutionalize informal practices into replicable protocols. 4. Develop a comprehensive disaster risk management framework integrating civil society insights. 5. Strengthen legal and structural support for CSOs as essential partners in national response systems. Together, these measures can help translate lessons learned into clearer roles, stronger systems, and better outcomes.
Thank you. As I said, this video will be available as of today on social media, and I have to say we're very, very proud of it, and thank you all ever so much, those who have been part of conceptualizing it and putting it together. I want to invite now, our final segment is the interactive conversation around not just the research, but also the subject matter of the research. So first of all, I want to invite the moderator, our colleague, Dr. Lars Christie. Dr. Lars Christie is a senior research affiliate at the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship. And his research, by the way, is on the ethics of humanitarian aid. So thank you for being with us, Lars. I want to invite also a member of the advisory board of the Asfari Institute and a disability activist, a feminist disability activist, I must say, and the founder of Women Disability Group, Haltech. Amal Sharif, join us, please. Sally Abi Khalil, the regional director of Oxfam in the MENA region, and also recently joined us as a senior fellow at the Asfari Institute. Sally, please. Our colleague and partner from the Ministry of Social Development, Abir Assis, thank you for being with us. Tfaddali, Abir. And also representing the minister, I think, Minister Hanan Sayed. And then, last but not least, the director of the disaster risk reduction at the Lebanese Red Cross, Qasim Sha'lan. I thought Qasim would be the gentleman with the Red Cross jacket. So.
Okay, so thank you very much for allowing me to moderate this very esteemed panel. And Lina has already given a brief presentation of the panelists. So I think I've asked all the panelists to prepare a very short introductory statement for max 5 minutes. So I suggest we just start with that. And I would like to invite our first panelist, Mr. Qasim Sha'lan, Disaster Risk Reduction Director at the Lebanese Red Cross. Qasim's journey with the Lebanese Red Cross spans over 3 decades, starting as an emergency medical technician in 1993. And he's been a driving force behind expanding the organization's disaster risk reduction work from a small pilot in Tyre to a full national coverage. And today co-chairs the Middle East and North Africa Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction Community of Practice for the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement. Qasim, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So, just quick reflection based on what is presented, and again based on our experience on the disaster risk reduction. You know, when it comes to the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, one of our core business is community-based work, and again we are playing the auxiliary role for the government. With that said, we are contributing to all of the global commitment like Sendai Framework, Paris Agreement, etc., in order to support the government with their commitment and taking into consideration the community focus. And this is what we call it, the bottom-up and up-bottom approach feeding to each other. And what that means in practice, as a LRC, we have national coverage, and again, we work very closely with the community. And again, we have our presence at the national level. So for example, I am the focal person at the LRC as a DRM at Council of Ministry, where we work very closely with the relevant ministries and other national organizations. And again, with, with this coordinations, we were able to bring the community voice to the decision makers. And at the same time, we are able to bring the policies into action at the community-based work. So today, we have really good examples that I can provide, and I believe with whom concern, this is something I'm really happy to do follow-up discussions about it. There's already existing community contingency planning, where LRC are mandated to do that. And we train more than 600 municipalities on the community contingency planning. We are working and we are creating community emergency response team, which is they are trained on doing neighborhood search and rescue, domestic fires, first aid, and other part related to pandemic and other relevant things. Everything related to work very closely with the local institution, because for us we believe the first responders, they are the communities. And again, in order to do that, we need to enhance their response to be aligned with the national response plan. There's already existing national disaster risk management plan where there's clear role and responsibility for every ministry. It was reviewed after the last conflict, and there's a lot of recommendations are taking place. Again, we believe that's very important to enhance the existing structures, and with that said, we work very closely with MOSA and with DRM at Council of Ministry and other ministry in order to not, name all of them. We are working with anticipatory action with Meteo Lebanon, CNRS, DRM at Council of Ministry, Ministry of Public Health, which is, we already have triggers related to the winter storm. We are working on the triggers related to the heat wave, and there's already ongoing discussions into this part. When it comes to the early warning for all initiative, we are leading in Pillar 4, and Pillar 4 mean working very closely with the national organization and local government, and we are working very closely with the part related to the community early warning mechanism. So just to say, based on the recommendation, there is already ongoing established. And again, what we are always advocating for, anyone need to work on supporting the community. It's very important to invest in existing structures. And today, this is one of the weak areas that we have, that, the majority, when they are trying to work with the community, the majority, they are trying just it is not only to, so I will try to be polite as much as I can. It's mainly, I see it's mainly visibilities. So which is really, the aim, anyone work, they have the right for the visibility, but again, coordination, sharing information, build on what we have. This is really the aim that we really need to enhance a lot. In the last conflict, there's a lot happened. So, the Prime Minister already assigned Minister Yassin during that time to lead all the coordination with UN agencies, again in a very close coordination with DRM at Council of Ministries and MOSA and others. And I believe there's a lot established that we can build on, and we can learn and move forward. So, this is the 5 minutes. If you give me more time, I'm happy to add more. Thank you.
Thank you, Qassem. You'll have more time in the panel. Our next panelist is Ms. Abir Khaziz, Emergency National Coordinator at the Ministry of Social Affairs, where she brings over 25 years of experience in social development and humanitarian response. Abir leads Lebanon's national coordination of response to armed conflict, displacement, and other emergencies, with a focus on keeping social protection services running even in the hardest of times. The floor is yours, Abir. I understand you will speak in Arabic, so those of you who don't understand, like me, need to pick up one of these so you can pay attention. All right.
صباح الخير جميعا ويعطيكم العافية. رح أحكي عربي بصفتي ممثلة لوزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية. رح أحكي بشكل بسيط جدا عن تجربة الوزارة. أنا كممثل الوزارة بالطوارئ صراحة بلشت مع الحرب الأخيرة على لبنان، حتكون الحكي مركز أكثر من هون. كان في عنا خطة وطنية على صعيد لبنان، بس لما تحضرت من أواخر 2023، بس لما وصلنا على التنفيذ على الأرض لقينا أنه الخطة هي حبر على ورق. التنسيق ما كان موجود بين كل الوزارات المعنية، بين كل الفعاليات المعنية. كان عنا خطة كتير حلوة 300 صفحة، بس جينا على الأرض كأنه ما في عنا شيء. مع هيك الاستجابة كانت أكثر من ضمن الظروف، خلوني استعمل كلمة رائعة، لأنه قدرت تتوحد الجهود بين الوزارات المعنية، بين المنظمات الدولية وبين منظمات المجتمع المحلي بمختلف أشكالها، من متطوعين صغار بأحياء ما عندهم صفة رسمية، ما عندهم شخص معنوي، للمؤسسات الكبيرة. التنسيق كان ضعيف ببعض المحلات، قوي ببعض المحلات، بس قدرنا نوصل لاستجابة جيدة. كانت ناقصة بكتير محلات انه الكل كان تركيزه على مراكز الإيواء، نسينا الشريحة الأكبر من النازحين اللي هي كانت قاعدة بالبيوت، واللي هلا عم نحاول نتدارك انه اذا صار اي كارثة جديدة لا سمح الله الاستجابة تكون عن جد عم تشمل الكل، ما نكون عم نركز على فئة دون فئة. كان في تركيز أكتر بالرغم من الجهود اللي قامت فيها المنظمات الدولية، كان في تركيز أكتر على اللبنانيين، كان في تهميش للغير لبنانيين وللفئات الأضعف. هلا الوزارة كخطوة أولى عم نحاول إعادة هيكلة الوزارة ليكون في وحدة متخصصة للكوارث بالوزارة تعمل بالتنسيق مع كل المعنيين. عم بيكون في خطة على صعيد الحكومة للتوحيد، لأنه عندنا كتير مؤسسات تعنى بالكوارث، عندنا مجلس الجنوب، عندنا الهيئة العليا للإغاثة، عندنا اللجنة الوطنية للطوارئ، عندنا دور الوزارات المتفرع. عم ينشغل مثل ما قال قاسم لمراجعة الخطة الوطنية ولتوحيد الجهود، يعني لازم يكون في عندنا خطة وطنية الأدوار فيها أوضح وبراكتيكال. الخطة السابقة كانت الأدوار فيها إذا بدنا عامة جدا، لما بنجي على التنفيذ على الأرض ما بيعود كل واحد يعرف شو بده، كان في تداخل بيناتهم. إن شاء الله نكون عم نمشي بالطريق الصحيح واستفدنا من التجربة السابقة لنقدر نحط خطة شاملة تشمل كل الأفرقاء من الأول، كل واحد يكون دوره واضح فيها، نقدر نوصل لقاعدة بيانات وطنية موحدة فعلا، ما تكون كمان مجزأة أو كل حدا عنده معلومة وكل حدا بده يحتفظ بالمعلومة لنفسه ما يعطيها للتاني تنقدر فعليا نلبي الحاجات. الوزارة بخلال فترة الحرب السابقة قدرنا نوصل لتوحيد الشغل وضبط كل العمل يلي عم يتم تحت سيكتور البروتكشن الحماية، كان منسق بشكل كامل مع الوزارة وكانت تجربة جيدة جدا. هلا عم يتم توحيد كل المبادرات التي تعنى بالمساعدات النقديه الكاش اسيستنس، كمان كلها رح تكون تحت مظله الوزاره. هاو خطوتين اساسيه، ان شاء الله نقدر نكفي بكل الخطوات لاحقا، ونكون عم نقدر نجمع كل الافرقاء بطريقه فعليا تؤدي الخدمات توصل للمعنيين، والجمعيات تاخذ دورها وما تكون عم تلغي دور الوزارات، نوصل لخطة وطنية يتكامل فيها دور الكل مع بعضهم، لأنه إيد لوحدها ما بتزقف، لازم نكون عم نشتغل كلنا سوا. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very clear and frank presentation, Ms. Abid, and for a very good simultaneous translation. Our next panelist out is Sally Abil Khalil, who serves as Oxfam's International's Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa, a role that she has held since 2021. And in this position, Sally leads Oxfam's wide-ranging development and humanitarian programs across the MENA region. And her work spans across several areas, a few among them, supporting youth and women through social innovation and entrepreneurships, championing their right to decent work, and building civil society networks. The floor is yours. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And just a fun fact that I was one of the original teams that designed CAMEALEON back many years ago in another capacity. So it's really special in some ways to be here as a panelist after all these years today. I'm going to read a few remarks from the Oxfam perspective. So again, thank you to the Asfari Institute for convening this timely discussion, and to the CAMEALEON Consortium partners and research team as well for grounding this work in evidence and lived experience. The central question of the study is not simply who delivered aid, it is who was already there when the crisis struck. And that distinction fundamentally changes how we think about preparedness. Emergency response is not only about scale, logistics, and funding. It is about presence, it is about trust, and it is about who is embedded in the communities before, during, and long after emergencies unfold. The recent war and repeated shocks in Lebanon demonstrated something very clear, that local civil society actors were not peripheral responders. They were the backbone of the early response. Community organizations, women-led groups, volunteer networks mobilized within hours, not because of formal mandates, but because of social legitimacy and lived connection. Where local actors were supported, response was faster, more dignified, and more aligned with the real needs. Where they were absent or sidelined, gaps widened, regardless of how many international agencies arrived. And this is not unique to Lebanon. We see it in the Gaza response, where local civil society continues to respond under genocide and siege. We see it in Yemen, where women's rights organizations continue to respond to displaced families before and after. And we see it in Syria, where civil society organizations continued to provide basic services to communities under severe access constraints. And the lesson is consistent. Crisis response does not begin with funding, it begins with communities. If we take a feminist and decolonial lens seriously, we must confront an uncomfortable reality. The humanitarian system has historically concentrated power and decision-making far from affected communities. Local actors are often too treated as implementers rather than leaders, delivery channels rather than co-architects of response. If preparedness is to work, local civil society must be structurally embedded in anticipatory action frameworks. That means involvement in risk analysis, early warning, trigger activation decisions, direct access to flexible funding, leadership within coordination systems, but not as partners of convenience, but as decision makers. Preparedness built solely through international institutions must appear efficient on paper, but it remains socially fragile in practice. This also requires a shift of how donors invest away from short-term subcontracting towards long-term institutional strengthening and community-based and women-led organization. Preparedness is not only about readiness, it's about redistribution of power, trust, and resources. At the same time, we must be clear, civil society also cannot replace the state. Communities may first respond, but responsibility for protection, social protection floors, and equitable public services rests with public institutions. Without state involvement in universal systems, emergency response will continue substituting for protections that should already exist. Another lesson from recent crises is that inequality deepens in emergencies. Women and girls, migrants, LGBTQIA+ individuals, people with disabilities, and families outside formal systems. Local civil society actors are often the first to identify and reach those falling through the cracks, precisely because they are embedded in social realities. Preparedness that ignores inequalities will always remain incomplete. And as we integrate AI and technology into anticipatory action, we must also be careful. These tools should strengthen community knowledge, not replace it. They must be locally governed, embedded in national systems, and accompanied by safeguards against bias, data misuse, and digital exclusion. If innovation recentralizes power, we risk reproducing the very inequities we claim to address. Ultimately, localization is not a technical reform, it's a political choice. A choice about whose knowledge we value, whose leadership we fund, and whose resilience we prioritize. If anticipatory action in Lebanon and across crisis contexts is to be effective, local civil society cannot remain at the margins of preparedness frameworks. They must be at the center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally. Finally, we will hear from Ms. Amal Sharif, founder and managing director of HALTEC, a Lebanon-based organization at the intersection of disability inclusion, accessibility, and humanitarian response. Amal combines design expertise and lived experience as a person with a disability to advocate for an obvious but nevertheless sadly ignored message. Persons with disabilities are not, obviously, passive beneficiaries. They are right holders and partners in decision making. Amal, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the crisis that we have lived. I want to speak briefly about the role of the civil societies in emergency, in emergency escalations in Lebanon, especially from the perspective of person with disability from an inclusion aspects. First, as a grassroots organizations, we don't work in emergencies, or we work as in tech and developing products, but we step in when there is a needs. Sometimes we started in COVID, and then Beirut blast, and then in the last war. As a grassroots, we know the community, we know the people, we know the area, and we know their needs. They get in touch with us, we didn't get in touch with them. So when they ask us, and a grassroots, and we have a big data of persons with disability and women with disability, since COVID, and then since the collapse of the economic, the first were affected by the economic collapse were people with disability. And then there were the first who lost their job in the economic collapse were people with disabilities. The impact of the shortage of electricity impacted people with disability a lot to access education, to access medical services, and to escape during crisis from their shelters, home. So for us, during the collapse, or sorry, during the 2024 war, many families were not asking for food. They were asking for things that helps them survive day by day. Rent support, transportation, medication, communication cost, and support related to assistive devices. What we noticed in 2020 during Beirut port explosion, and then this war, and then in 26, there is always mass of giving wheelchairs and crutches, while the needs it's somewhere else. It's not only disability is not about wheelchair and the crutch. It's more beyond this. The needs of people, they were like, it's somewhere behind this. Maybe people, they were needed like just like devices for hearing. They lost their devices for hearing, or planche. I don't know what is it. Planche for Lebanon. الخشبة اللي بيحطوها للاستحمام أو to shower, they couldn't. When displacing from their home, they couldn't take all their devices. They fled. Sometimes the family, they have 3 persons out of 5, they have disability. Mom and her kids, father and his kids. And then these people, they couldn't carry all their stuff. They just ran without their crutch, without their wheelchairs. And then this took us like how to support them as a health tech organization, as a grassroots. We don't have the resources. We had a little grant, and then we set a mechanism. If they need any device, any supports, we will connect organization in North Lebanon and Bekaa and wherever they have this supply. But we will support all people with their family with cash. And we set a system to track what we spend, and to be transparent in front of our donor. We send money via Wish and OMT to track. It's really, for us, it was like beyond shelters and the stairs at accessible shelters, and then privacy and accessible information. It was, the people couldn't affect. I will tell you someone was sitting in the Place de Martyrs, ساحة الشهداء, and we couldn't find a shelter for her. We supported her weekly by goodies to sustain her living in the street. This is insane. I'm someone, I was trying to reserve her dignity, but at the same time we were not able to find, even schools are not accessible. Schools are not accessible. This is take us to a kids with disabilities. They will not have access to schools unless it's private schools, and they have to pay a lot of money to access education. It was like also like there is a lot of there was a mass support for without asking. Yeah, one of the parcels that we are distributed, the boxes of goodies, no one take into account that many people with disabilities face challenges related to what kind of food they can eat, especially when they have like severe disability, different kind of disability. They can't. No one take care of this small needs based on individual needs. Really, it's not just a big plan of emergency. It should be breaking into steps and into needs, what people needs, and then how it should be directed when planning an emergency plan. It's not just about let's give them foods. And really, it was the response: we don't need this food. We don't eat this food. We need different something. We need to cook our food. We need to buy our foods, and we need to pay. The most important for them, it was like to pay the communication, to pay rent, and to be able to move from area to another area. They couldn't. They didn't have the money and the possibility to move from here and there. So this is from collected as a grassroots. We collected this information from our database, and then it was like it reflects the lack of. There was lack of real participation and decision making. Then when planning, it was this. We have like Hayat al-Tawari, and they have a lot of emergency, big organization. But when it comes to working on very specific needs, there is no plan. This is what I feel.
Thank you very much to you and to all of you. I'm sure you all have questions to each other. I have questions for you, but the audience, you've been waiting for several hours now, so I'm going to start by opening up the floor. If there's any questions from the floor to any of the panelists, just raise your hand.
Maybe one question to Amal. What, from your experience and you know that recent concrete experience and the examples you mentioned, what would you suggest as concrete improvements that would increase, you know, participation, decision making, etc., but also maybe more importantly the actual support that goes to people with disability in case of emergency and displacement?
Okay, first I would like suggest the training of before planning. I would suggest training from an inclusive vision, because if you don't understand properly, if you don't understand properly the needs of each group or within the group, disability is a wide range of different type of they have different types. I would suggest the training, hearing what each category needs and how to manage and how to during war, everything become like during crisis, and then you have to think about it from a perspective needs. Put yourself in their shoes and then think about if I don't have access, how to support, how to make things, and then really sometimes you have to think about it from a different aspects. It's not about always about food. Really, we have to and even sometimes the hygiene. Even you have to think about it completely different, and think about it, break it down into steps, and then each put a specific directions needed. Otherwise, we will keep in the same loop where people with disability wouldn't have the access to proper support during crisis.
Thank you. Good morning, Rana Khawand from MedCities UN Habitat Lebanon. I'm an urban resilience researcher, and we talk a lot about disaster risk management. We do diagnosis and assessment. One question related to localization first and to the ministry representative. So we see the importance of local civil society actors in response, in planning, in emergency. So do we continue to view civil society actors as today a buffer, emergency buffer, or do we need today to recognize them as part of the response or also planning, so not only in the response? Second, when we do diagnosis and assessment, the first thing we look at is data. And the lack of data today to gather information and to assess the status quo, what's happening on the ground. So, but we don't have real-time data coming from communities. And my question today is how we can leverage data, digital tools coming also, and AI to look into the data that is missing, and how we can also motivate communities to start reporting so that we build resilience systems at the national level. Thank you.
بالنسبة للسؤال على إذا فهمتك توتالي الأكيد منظمات المجتمع المدني بكل أشكالها حتضل جزء أساسي. الدولة قد ما ادعينا في عنا نقص بالعديد، في عنا نقص بالفندز، في عنا نقص بكل الأمور، فأكيد ما فينا نكون عم نوصل لاستجابة كاملة لكل أنواع الكوارث إلا بالتعاون مع المنظمات. وبالخطة الجديدة رح يكون في إشراك لهم من مراحل التخطيط حكما، لأنه عم نجرب نتعلم من التجارب السابقة، وتيكون في فعليا ما تضل عم بتضل الجهود متفرقة. قد ما جربنا إذا ما كان من التخطيط الكل ماشي مع بعض على قاعدة وحدة، على نظرة وحدة، على رؤية وحدة، رح تضل الأمور مفرطعة. فالتصور لقدام أكيد، وهيدا أحد الأسباب لصير في وحدة مركزية اللي عم نطالب على طول إنه يصير في وحدة فقط تهتم بالكوارث، ما نضل حتى على صعيد الحكومة أكثر من وحدة لنقدر نوصل لتوحيد الجهود بطريقة أساسية من التحضير والتخطيط والاستباق الأمور إلى التنفيذ وإلى مراحل التعافي لاحقا.
If you allowed me to add, because we work again very closely with MOSA and with DRM at Council of Ministries. So again, when we need to speak about preparedness, I mean, community preparedness is a key. So the last escalation, so we had around 1,300,000 displaced, which is beyond the government capacity to respond. Now, even if you need to take scenario of an earthquake, because I mean, we are the one who respond to Turkey earthquake and we support with a government delegation. I mean, the main responders at the first 72 hours, it was mainly the communities. You know, even with the international support. So what we do with this regard? I mean, since years, we have already existing part, we call it community-based disaster risk reduction. So when we select community, we do something, we call it vulnerability capacity assessment at the level of the communities. With this tool, we do transit work. In addition to that, we do stakeholder mapping, stakeholder analysis. We look at the influencers, and we start to build the capacity within the local institution based on their mandate. Then we do something, we call it community-based disaster risk management at the level of the local municipalities. And we integrate these local communities into this contingency plan. Now, example about data and access to data. During the conflict, so what we've done in order to access information, especially with the displaced people outside the shelters, because we used to have around 20% in the shelters, 80% outside the shelters. And especially at the first 1 month, it was hectic to know where they are. So what we've done, we created something, we call it online self-registration. And this online self-registration, it was communicated at the Prime Minister team that leading on this was Minister Yassin. And again, it's coordinated at the level of subnational level with all of the governors. And then we use the existing communication channels with the local authorities in order this information to reach for the communities. Again, there's live data. I can speak about it more through my intervention on the conflict. Thank you.
I have two questions, actually. The first one is for Sally. Her Excellency mentioned the Grand Bargain, and the Grand Bargain states that the minimum core funding, unrestricted core funding, should be at least 15% going to the CSOs, while the lessons learned from the report of MOSA after the war showed that it's way less than this number. It's maximum 5% or less, I think. So how the INGOs would address this? This is the first thing. The second thing about localization is the attitudinal barrier. I know that there are a lot of institutional barriers and funding barriers. However, there is also attitudinal barrier because this is a comfort zone of many INGOs working this way. So they started using this colonial terminology, I would say, like field localization, and also adapting colonized approaches like white feminism and other kind of colonized approaches. What is the way to address these things? And sorry, I'm Hassan Tabiq from Help Age International. I'm the regional advisor for MENA and Eurasia.
So obviously I cannot speak for all INGOs. I can speak for my agency only as Oxfam and give the Oxfam perspective. I mean, absolutely, I think it's well documented that you know, there's still a way to go for us to fulfill even the grand bargain commitments. But as Oxfam, we have over the last decade, basically since the grand bargain 1.0, that we are committed to fulfill grand bargain commitments, and we do that in several ways. And this is not to say that we have done it right or that we still don't have significant change that we need to do both internally, and there's a very serious element of behavioral change indeed that needs to happen. You know, decolonization is not about, again, it's not just a process, and you know, we use nice terminology like shifting power and whatnot, and you know, we have extensive feminist values that we adhere to as an organization, but ultimately it's, you have to decolonize people's minds and attitudes as you suggest, and that takes a significant amount of time and investments to really be able to do that. But how we are trying to do that, and again with various levels of successes, but there's at least organizationally a commitment to do that. For example, when it comes to ICR sharing, you know, and how in all of grants, like there's an ICR like 8-10%, whatever, we have committed to sharing that with partners now. I mean, it's not a huge step. We should have done it many years ago, but you know, it is something that we are now doing, and that ranges from various levels depending on context as well. So that's a big commitment. We are targeting 30% of all our funding to go to local organizations. So that's also a significant commitment compared to some of our peer agencies as well. And then we are also looking at what does partnership mean, and what does that look like. So, you know, partnership has various definitions, and how you do partnership, it can be a very technical sort of a contracting one, or really as equals, and you know, how you co-design an intervention, you share ICR, you share power, you share decision making. And then also to really, what we're doing now is really to look deep into ourselves, you know, in a changing world, in a very fluid context. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, in a sector that is imploding really, and where resources are stretched to the maximum, and the needs are greater than ever. You know, what is our added value as an INGO, as Oxfam, and what does that look like? And these conversations are happening now in real time, and they're not easy conversations, because they really target at the heart of the existence of INGOs and our essence. But at least we're having those conversations, and we are being reflective. And we may not have the answers, and whatever the answers may look like, they might not really address, like, you know, being able to change, because I mean, ultimately we may want a world where INGOs don't exist. we shouldn't exist, or we exist in a very specific way, with a very specific selling point, unique selling point that works to support local communities and local partners. And as Oxfam, one of our added values, I would say, from my perspective, is that we are a global voice. We are a global brand. We're quite loud and are big advocates, and we can really link the local to the region to the global on issues. I think that is of concern, as we, you know, on very broad range of social justice issues from an inequality lens in a world that is really becoming, you know, much more unequal than we've ever seen, ever in the last, you know, decades. And so how could we amplify those voices and for like-minded organizations to, you know, to network and build alliances and movements to counter a very scary world that we're facing. And I think Oxfam can be a conveyor and a platform for that. Thanks.
Question.
Yeah. Yeah, no. We have time for more questions. But I just wanted to draw the debate a little bit on to pick up on a point that that was made both in the report and by some of the speakers. Utterøy mentioned it, I think, and it's the point about the possible tensions between CSOs and INGOs and government agencies. And it concerns primarily the issue of humanitarian principles. So I would like to invite the panelists to reflect a little bit on, or maybe have specific examples on conflicts or difficult discussions about whether civil society agents should follow and adhere to the same principles as international humanitarian organizations should, namely neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Is that fair to expect civil society organizations to follow those principles, or should they follow other principles having to do with connections to the community, solidarity, trust, local knowledge, lots of other valuable but not necessarily the same guiding principles as the humanitarian principles? So maybe from the ICRC, Red Cross?
You know, I mean, for us, like as a Red Cross, we really love this topic because we always believe on localization and to empower the local communities. And again, as we always say, the first responders are the communities, and they are one of the main stakeholders in order to access information and to understand the community need and to understand the community perspective. But I mean, it is not only about that. I mean, that really required tool in order to know this organization ahead of time, to do ongoing discussion with them, to understand their way, to understand their area of interest, to see how you can enhance them, how you can empower them. And then based on that, you can put them into like categories, you know? Like, you know, for example, this group focusing on part related to the health, this group focusing on part related to a social worker, this focusing on part related to relief, shelters, etc. And sometimes it's like mixed through all of them. And then you need to start to build their capacities and link them to the right structures. And here, yes, I mean, it is always good if they are following these principles. But again, if not, that don't mean that you cannot work with them. Because at the end, you need to make sure that this organization are accepted by their communities as a first. Because if they are not accepted by their communities, then you can create harm by doing this intervention. But again, for me, I can, like, you know, add additional question. Do you will work only with the local institutions that they have capacities? For me, the answer should be no. It's really about how you can empower their capacities during the peacetime in order for them to be better positioned, like, you know, to lead. And this is localizations. And when it comes to the ministries, I will speak our part because we work very closely with MOSA as well, and then I will go to your part as well. That, you know, at the end, you need to see the existing structures. And I will give example about Tripoli now. Now, Tripoli, already in a very close coordination with the governorate and with Ministry of Environment, so we already, we met all the local institutions that they have interest to support their local communities. We mapped their area of interest and expertise, and we told them, look, this area are already covered. If you have small funds, this is the gap where you can really provide. The other part for me, which is really, again, focusing on an organization like, people with disability. Again, because they are like, a key element and they are key stakeholders in order to understand their need and plan accordingly. And again, on the, so I believe on the other topic during this discussion, I can speak about our experience with the Union of People with Disabilities and their task force for them to be better prepared for any kind of crisis as well.
I would like to add something. It's related to Ministry of Social Affairs, because usually they work more with the institution established like CAMEALEON, like etc., or this well-established organization. While they couldn't find a bridge to include grassroots organizations, like, because during the war we were the only organization where we had access to someone to interpret with sign language, with another layer of discriminated minority group within the minority of people with disability, hearing impairment. So they ask us if they can step, and they ask us to support. So really this is very important to include emerging organizations, that it's not we don't provide services, but we are forced during the war or any crisis to support the community, because they trust us, they get in touch with us, and they ask for support. Sometimes when there is a platform to register, my question is, as someone I audit digital infrastructure, is it accessible for hearing impairment? This is the main question that it comes to my mind when you mentioned that there was online subscription, but because, and then there was another question, will I be able to register people with disability if I'm not the one in needs? So really, this is technical issues that I focus on it, because no one think about it. When it comes to crisis and then we face these questions, I don't have answer.
I just very quickly, I think in the scary world that we're facing today, I don't think we should question our humanitarian principles, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive with any other principles. I think, on the contrary, we need to really dig our feet and defend with all our beings the humanitarian principle, given what we've seen happen around us. So yeah, I think it's really important that we really embrace them fully, and all we have left are our principles. And just on that, as Oxfam, I mean, we always say that we're impartial but not neutral as an organization. And that means that allows us to advocate and have a voice and give a platform for our partners to also have a voice and advocate. So there are ways to nuance and embrace, while really also, but to really also really with all our beings, especially in today's world and what we're seeing unfold and around us, that the humanitarian principles are really a red line. Thank you.
Just to push a little bit on that, so you say you're impartial but not neutral, yet neutrality is a humanitarian principle.
This is when it comes to our voice. Because we are an organization that has a triple mandate. We're a humanitarian, developmental, and influencing organization. And that's what we mean when it comes to that. And there's various interpretations of the humanitarian principles as well.
I'm not really positioned to answer about this on the name of the ministry. I'm not included in this discussion deeply, so I could give the state of the ministry. But as Abir Assis, I say that no, I agree with Asim that we don't have to work only with the NGOs. We don't have to accept everyone to have the same principles. They have to be global. They have to do basically more in the do no harm approach, where we try to reach all the people that are in need, make them feel safe, accepted, and included, and this is the base. And then all these terminology that we are using is just a global framework, and sometimes it's more an obstacle more than it's giving freedom to work or in opening spaces to work.
My name is Sandy Ntairik. I'm from Halem. Halem is, for those who don't know, is an LGBTIQ organization working in Lebanon. We're not a humanitarian organization, we're an advocacy organization, but unfortunately, like many other organizations, we found ourselves forced to shift our response to humanitarian response because, unfortunately, our government, again, not for the first time, did not include LGBT community in their response. I just want to make a statement or a disclaimer. I do understand that civil society organizations, grassroots, or community people are seen as first responders, but it is very important that we do not forget that it is the state's obligation, duty, constitutional and legal duty to develop and to be prepared for any crisis. And it is really sad that we still see a timeline with the same findings from the Civil War up until now. It is really sad that we do not learn from our mistakes, we do not document, that we still gatekeep, and we still don't share information. And it is also unfortunate that Amal, me, or other marginalized communities in this country are often seen as people of interest in research, or are often, and I'm not talking about this one, I'm coming back to this important thing, but it's a pattern. We're paraded, we're researched, but we're never on the table. So thank you, Asfari, for having us and for giving us the space to speak. The second comment is about this. More often, when we're the first responders and in humanitarian aid, we unfortunately do not have the time, the capacities, the luxury of documenting what we're doing. Unfortunately, because it's other people's lives and rights at the stake. So it's not like we can deliver, for example, humanitarian aid and at the same time document how are we doing it, what worked well, what did not work well. So I think it is important, and this is very important that, for example, academic institutions jump to the rescue and do this for us to help us document what we're doing, analyzing this, collecting information, and then sharing it. So I think this is something that can be done, and I thank you, all of the organizations, for doing this on behalf of us, because to be honest, we know how important that is, but we don't have the time to do it. I just want to add 2 layers to Dr. Lars' questions regarding expectations. I want to add one aspect to the expectations that you talked about in terms of what should international organizations expect from us. I would say, because Sally, thank you, she mentioned the word mandate. It is about our expectations from them. It's about our expectations as first responders and local organizations from our colleagues at international organizations. And I say this because this is what we thought when we knew that the ministry or the state is developing the national, that was not very national, by the way, the national emergency plan since 2023. And with close collaboration and coordination, and with the support of international organizations. So I want to remind everyone here that international organizations have a mandate. Inclusion it's on their mandate. This is what they communicate, for example. And it is unfortunate that we, at this time, still to organize info sessions to sensitize state organizations and INGOs on what does it mean, what inclusion means, because a lot of people were left out. So that was not inclusion. So it is about, I would rather ask about our expectation, because for our organization, I'm talking about only my organization, the international organizations who were part of the development of the state emergency plan did not meet our expectation in being aligned with their own mandates to start with. Another thing about expectation is when it comes, for example, to support, when international organizations want to support organizations or grassroots, specifically when support is conditioned on, we are talking about criteria on compliance, and treating what we're doing business as usual. Because we've experienced this. We're very thankful for the organizations, for the international organizations that reached out to us to support us, and I mean support financially, because that was needed, yes. But in specific cases, support did not understand the realities of how we operate as organizations within a war. It's not business as usual. We cannot be compliant in war. We cannot report on. We cannot report to start with, let alone be financially compliant, for example. So this is another expectation that I think I would like to ask international organizations. I'm sorry, Oxfam. It's only you on the. And I want to mention that Oxfam reached out to Halem during the war and offered support. So thank you. But how much, why would support not understand the realities of war and treat it as business as usual?
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm with CAMEALEON and Oxfam. I was hired by Oxfam and I work with CAMEALEON as social protection advisor. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to mention something about like local organizations and like, sorry, let me just stand up. Like local organizations and their importance. Basically, in terms of like being neutral or impartial, I feel like a lot we need to consider, aside from the ones that are centered in Beirut, which are more open, I would assume. I'm not sure, but like, anyway, whatever. But the whole point is we can't like dismiss the fact that like local organizations exist within a context. Exist within a context, basically, and like a lot of the times they exist in very political contexts, and there's a lot of that. And at the same time, while local organizations are amazing and being the first responders and everything like that, but at the same time, we do have to consider the fact that there is a degree of like gatekeeping, which is totally fine. It's not our right to criticize how local organizations function within their own communities and stuff like that. But that should definitely not stop us from continuing to work with organizations, like local organizations. I think it's really important to consider the fact that they are not international organizations and they're much more local, and they exist within a community in a context. That's my take on that. Which highlights then the importance of having a national response, and it's super important to have a national response under that, which falls under the umbrella of social protection and the need for the state to be there. So that's one. And then a question, maybe this is a good question for like all the panelists, but if you could pick one thing to like, so a war could happen tomorrow, right? Like any war a conflict can happen like tomorrow. We're always scared. We're always like, I don't know, we've desensitized. But basically, if you had to pick one thing, what would you do right now? Like, what would be the first priority that you guys would, yeah. I mean, I feel like it would help also feed into the recommendations and the learning that is happening here.
Sorry, can you clarify the last question? So what's the one thing
that
one thing that you in terms of responding or cooperating?
In terms of having to support NGO, like local civil society actors in their response. Like, what would be the prioritization? Which policy would you guys prioritize in terms of having a better response for local organizations, if that makes sense? To support them, how can you best support them?
Okay.
Does that make sense? Sorry for the...
We'll give it a try, and then have you afterwards, but, no, sorry. Should we just, okay. Whoever wants to... I
mean, I'll just quickly just come in as best I can on the intervention of Halem, and thank you for that intervention. I mean, just quickly, I mean, INGOs, we exist within a very big system, right? Like we're just one part of a big system, and lots of parts of that system have to change for it to, you know, for effective change to happen at the community level. And there's the top down, bottom up, sideways, the various approaches of systems change that have to happen. Indeed, that there is an element of risk transfer that is happening by the INGO organizations, and we talk about this all the time internally when we talk about localization. And what is it that we need to do to ensure that by localization we're not transferring risk? And it's a big debate, and we don't have the answers yet, and we may never. But there's various parts of the system that have to answer that question too, because ultimately we're accountable to governments for the funds that we use and transfer, and those are taxpayers' money. Whereas Oxfam and many other organizations also fundraise from the public, and we're accountable to our public for that money that we raise and how we use it. And then the system itself is quite politicized. We have to function within that system because the needs are great, but at the same time, we also can advocate against that same system to ensure that also conditionalities are not made, neither on the INGOs nor to local organizations. And unfortunately, we're seeing the conditionality element, in fact, become quite prominent these days. You know, as we look at a world where right-wing governments are, you know, rising and taking center stage, where, you know, advocacy and voice now is a problem. And so how do we protect all of that? I mean, they're very existential questions. But, you know, one thing that we do, which again doesn't, because, you know, I was part of the Beirut blast response. We as Oxfam were not present in Beirut. We didn't work in Beirut, but we only decided to respond via a partner-led approach. And that meant that we wouldn't be physically on the ground, and we would have partners, and we specifically targeted marginalized communities that we saw are falling through the cracks because other organizations, even those that have been in Beirut for a long time, weren't able to target. And that was our approach. And internally, we removed some of the sort of compliance barriers that were there. We documented what we can to be able to develop better partnership frameworks before an emergency happens, and that was all learning from the Beirut response, because you know, yes, like to get a contract out, it took an unbelievable amount of time, and that was very embarrassing and really detrimental. So, you know, at least I can speak for my organization, but I know that other peer organizations are doing the same, but we have a long way to go. That there is a process of learning, and that learning, you know, is addressing a lot of, you know, certain gaps that have been documented and experienced, and through the lived experience of our partners, and as an INGO. But there's but we are just one part of a wider system that needs to change.
I mean, with this question, I mean, if it's part related to your study, I'm like happy to engage more. I'm just like, you know, what's your name? Yeah, so I'm like replying to your question as well. So, I mean, if there is something related to your study, I'm happy to engage after this panel, because there is a lot we need to take it into consideration. It is not only part related to the fund. It's something related to the community engagement that we need, like, you know, organization to support on shelter, to support on distribution. I mean, there's like a lot. There's like, we have ongoing plan as a Lebanese Red Cross. We are providing this support on the national level in a very close coordination with the national plan and MOSA and others. And I don't think the time is enough to like, but at least for you to know that there's big things existing.
I'm Fadi Hajar. I am international expert in peace and conflict. So my question will be focused on this dimension. Her Excellency mentioned about the peace nexus at the beginning, and I have just because, you know, during the war, we were seeing cases of tension on the ground, even when distributing food or non-food items, you know, a lot of cases, instead of doing good, people were really maybe unintentionally doing harm. So my question, and maybe for several people in the panel, and also for the research, did you come across the reasons behind the redundancy mentioned or duplication by Sarah? Or did you come across some of these reasons, which might be sometimes, at least on my experience in many places, not only in Lebanon, about individual and organizational ego, not only individual ego, about visibility, claiming who is doing this or that. So to what extent you were able to identify these essential issues that might trigger tension on the ground in the implementation and incorporate more conflict-sensitive, maybe, standards in the next, strategies, whether national or localized or at the local level, as Qasim was mentioning. Thank you.
If there's someone who wants to comment on the question that addresses the research on the report.
I think I can take part of it, because some of it was relating to the research on the redundancy of efforts.
The reasons for the...
It all boils down to the fact that there is no unified coordination mechanism that includes all relevant stakeholders, including civil society organizations who are stepping in to support communities that are affected. And so from each region, groups of community-based organizations were just trying to cover and scale as much as possible, especially at the beginning of the escalation. They just needed to support communities who are affected by the carpet bombing. So a lot of efforts were being duplicated because there was not one platform where information was being shared. A lot of information was politicized, and a lot of information was not accessible to all community-based organizations. Hence, some communities were not supported at all. They did not receive aid in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, some other communities were receiving the duplicate or more aid than others. So again, this circles back to the main idea of needing accessible information, not only at a formal level, but at the informal level, where small organizations are able to access communities that other larger UN organizations or agencies or government is not really able to access.
Okay, regarding the challenges faced as the shelters, especially when it comes to people with disability, most of the displaced people, they are not aware of the rights, of the needs of people with disability to live the ground floor for people with disability, for elderly, and this was one of the main challenge or tense in refugee centers because they are not aware. One of this challenge was really reported by many displaced people with disability, with their family, or even one member with disability. So, and then this was really one of the major tense within the shelters and the refugees centers selected. And then another layer in these shelters, and then which is I keep report that it's not accessible for wheelchair. There was no restroom, no privacy, and then many women with disability, they were subject of harassment within this kind of security or refugee places.
بس شغلة صغيرة تتعلق بهذا الموضوع إنه نحن في عنا كمية جمعيات تنشأ بلبنان مش طبيعية. عنا ما لا يقل عن 300 جمعية بتاخد علم وخبر كل سنة. ما في ولا محل بيجمعهم، لا بوزارة الداخلية بتقدر تاخد معلومات عنهم، ولا بوزارة الشؤون الاجتماعية بتاخد معلومات عنهم. ما في شيء بيجبرهم يشتغلوا تحت لواء، يعني عندهم ملء الحرية إنهم يشتغلوا. من ميلي هذا شيء كتير منيح، ومن ميلي تاني هذا عم عم بيكون ضرر، لأن حتى لما بنكون عم نحاول نجمع الجهود بفترات أي أزمة أو أي مشروع أنت بحاجة إنك تعمله، ما حدا عنده فكرة مين كل اللي موجودين على الأرض. في جمعيات بيكون أخذ علم وخبر ونايمة 10 سنين، بس يصير في مصيبة بفكروا لأنهم جمعية المصاري رح تنزل عليهم. بعتذر حديثي ما بيشبه حديث ممثل وزارة، بس لازم يكون عم قوله مثل ما هو. كل الناس تفكر انه بالازمات المصاري رح تشتي علينا، فكله بيصير بده يشتغل، ومشان هيك هيدا بيضيع الجهود اكثر وبيخلق مشاكل اكثر على الارض.
And again, just like for your research, there is already existing one unified database. It was during crisis. It was there. As a Lebanese Red Cross, we supported 20 operation room for the government with 121 members from the Red Cross. So, and it was live data. So we use very smart tool. We use ArcGIS tool, Survey 123, dashboards. It was live data. Even all the sector leads, they have access to this information. And any local organization, they approach this operation room, they received this information to avoid duplication. But the organizations that they are not aware about it, they are left behind because they don't know the right access. And some of them, they done communication with the wrong focal person and they get lost as well. So just like, for your research to don't lose direction, there's big investment done during the conflict. There is very strong tool, it was there. It was built during Beirut blast. It was enhanced during the last response from day one when it started in Tyre before the escalation.
So, hello, I'm Hala Al-Halo. I'm from NORCAP, NRC, and supporting the government of Lebanon, the Government Emergency Committee and the Ministry of Social Affairs. I have just a couple of very quick comments. One main comment on the research. So we've been hearing the word localization a lot, and we've heard about the humanitarian reset and the grand bargain, and we are 10 years into the grand bargain now, and there's this whole discussion happening right now at the level of the grand bargain. And I think the term localization is still very debatable, that we don't have one unified definition for what we mean by localization. But one main component of localization, which has been overlooked for the last 10 years, is the actual role of the government in localization, supporting the governments. And I think in a certain way, this answers a lot of the concerns that have been raised about the civil society and about how do we, what do we do for the civil society? And I think one of the main things that we need to take a step back and look at is how do we actually involve governments, because we always talk about local and national actors under the grand bargain, which is also debatable. How do we actually support governments to be able to support local actors and the civil society, the local civil society? Because if you don't have a governmental structure which is ready and structured well to be able to take in the support and to coordinate and to help that kind of support that will be given from the civil society, then we are not really doing anything, because we're not being sustainable. That's where the sustainability really is. So I would always be very careful when we're using the term localization on what is it exactly that we're working on. Localization does not mean only civil society. It does not mean only local actors. We're kind of trying to use the term government authorities also, so that we expand it as much as possible. But this is one of the debates taking place right now with the recommendations that we're sending to the grand bargain on really looking at all of these actors, each one on its own. So this is just for the research. The second thing about the humanitarian principles. I agree with Sally, they are not debatable. And I think anyone who works in any kind of humanitarian action needs to abide by them. However, I think considering the current context and what we've seen in the last 2 years, we need to reassess and revisit how are we assessing and how are we assessing people's implementation of the humanitarian principles. When we talk about neutrality, are we talking about neutrality in terms of a position from a humanitarian aspect on what is happening? And this is the interpretation. So I don't think it's really fair to ask a question whether civil society, local civil society, should implement the same humanitarian principles that the international actors are implementing, because there are a lot of question marks on how this whole thing is being implemented today, especially with the last 2 years. And the last thing about the...
Sorry, can we just stop? So now you have 2 questions?
No questions, just comments.
This is, okay. Yep.
Just 3 comments. Regarding the learning from the experiences, documenting, this is one research on civil society. The government of Lebanon did a massive lessons learned exercise on the actual war. It's been published. However, I don't think the problem is only with the documentation. We have a huge issue with documentation, that's for sure. But I think the problem is, how do we use these? Are we actually using them properly in decision making? Are they really informing? I think this is where the biggest gap is. How do we make use of the learnings that we have in a proper way, in a structured way, and in a sustainable way?
Hello, I'm Marwan Alawiye, part of the CAMEALEON team. Based on the research, one of the most important recommendations is to establish a national coordination system, and also to be set in priority of any crisis. I also heard the several iterations of learnings that the state have been doing, and it's so promising to hear that there's a big willingness to build on those learnings. So I want to, based on those, as well as the recommendations from our research, I want to discuss with maybe Qasim and Abir the state's vision, and whether you have foreseen any needs in order to establish those systems for future crises.
Okay. Here there is 2 answers for your questions. I mean, the first part, when it comes to the part related to the community preparedness and the community contingency planning, this is something as a Lebanese Red Cross within the national response plan, we have mandate to support the local communities into this part, and this is ongoing business. It's not, I mean, the escalation started from COVID-19 to cholera, to Beirut blast, to the last conflict. And there's a lot of learning, and there's a lot of engagement, and we have very powerful, successful story from the communities implementing their response. Like, you know, from the community early warning to the anticipatory action to the first responder, accessing information, there's too many, like, you know, successful stories. And I'm not saying that there is no area of improving, but sometimes it is not only because of the system, sometimes it is personal perspective. So sometimes, I mean, so the documents, they are there. You can go to one area, people, they are taking things serious and they are implementing that. And you go to other area, people that they are not willing to do things. So for me, there's 2 things. It's system and human resources taking things serious as well. Now, when it comes to the government now, because I'm a member on the DRM at Council of Ministry, but I'm not the one to speak on behalf of the government, but at least I can share the finding there. The first National Disaster Risk Management and Risk Reduction established in 2012. It was updated in 2017, then 2023, and then after the last escalation, they had, like, you know, review, and they had study, and they found out that they really need to revisit it again based on the best practices and lesson learned. So there's already existing national coordination mechanism for the DRR and the DRM at Council of Ministry, which is it's have clear role and responsibility for every ministry. It have clear coordination at the subnational level with the governorate, district, Maqam, union of municipalities and municipality with clear role and responsibility for everyone. Now, when it comes, and there, for example, for the Red Cross, there's clear role and responsibility. But when it comes about the contingency plan and the response preparedness, for us as a LRC, we enhance our capacities and knowledge for that. Same for MOSA. MOSA, they have, like, you know, clear role and responsibility into that, Ministry of Public Health, etc. They are the one who review their role and responsibility, and they say, okay, this is what we are willing to do, but the how within every ministry and within every institution. Okay, but we are not starting from scratch. There's really a lot that we can build on, but again, referring back to the part related to the localization, localization is not about engaging with the local community and with the local institution. Localization is really to hand over to the government and to the local communities and coach them and support them to lead. It's not about trying to take over that they have no capacities to move things forward. You know, this is a true localization on moving things. When it comes back about the community preparedness, this is a global framework. There's no questions behind it, especially with the early warning for all initiative, etc. Is we need to invest on community preparedness. By investing on community preparedness, that don't mean we are disregard the national preparedness part. So they are complementing each other.
Thank you. My name is Charlotte. I was a volunteer during the escalation. I worked mostly with migrant populations, so I'll keep my question very brief. Although the National Emergency Plan is cross-population on paper, this is really not what happened last year. To keep it brief, I'd like to know what are you planning to include migrant, Palestinian, and Syrian refugees into the potential new escalation that is coming? Thank you.
Honestly, I don't have an answer about it. It's still a debate as far as I know, because as I said previously, I'm not totally included in what's happening. I just have the broader lines, and no, honestly, I cannot answer this. I don't have the answer. It's not I cannot. I don't have the answer. I know that during the last war, we felt that it is a real problem and that they cannot be left behind. But what are the real steps that are being taken for now? This is what I don't know, just to be clear.
Even more important that you raised the question. So with that, I think we're going to have to conclude. If I will give you the chance to say some last final comments, that if there's something you weren't able to communicate. Then I suggest we convene for lunch and continue the discussion there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.